Welcome back to Freedom. I'm your host, Jeff Dardine. In this episode, I'll be showing you how you can be set free from the things of this world through the power of God's love. Today, I want to share with you a very sensitive story. I want to share with you what it was like for me while I was walking through the valley of the shadow of death. I'm sure that many of you are currently walking through the valley as you listen to this. All of my life I was very lonesome, and seemingly my life seemed pointless. No matter what I tried, I came up a failure. I wasn't popular by any stretch of the word. I had very few friends due to my introverted persona. I could not find satisfaction with anything that I tried. My father's comments to me were so hurtful that I was left feeling inferior and weak with everything I did. Any attempt that I made at trying to find a self-worth was shattered by his jokes about how terrible and worthless I was. In my junior year of high school, I was so proud of myself for making the baseball team. I couldn't wait to go home and tell my father what I did, that I made the team. The coach cut almost 10 guys, but I made it. I remember anxiously walking into our house. There was my dad eating a sandwich at the kitchen table. I boldly began to tell him, "Dad, I did it. I made the baseball team." He blankly stared at his sandwich and said, "You sucked as a kid. What makes you think you could do any better now?" I couldn't even begin to express how shattered my self-esteem was that day. I was just meant to be worthless. A month into playing baseball, I quit due to realizing I was as worthless as my father made me feel. As my life muttered forward, I found my lack of motivation to try anything just grew. The only thing I had was going skiing and surfing. All that I had to make me feel alive was the adrenaline rush of riding a wave or skiing. I didn't even have any friends that surfed or skied, so it was really just me going by myself to try to find some kind of adrenaline to make myself feel somewhat alive. Later in life, I found myself trying to find validation from being a married man. This had to be it, I thought. I didn't even have a skill set in choosing people at all, so I really just clung to the first person that was willing to be with me. As it turned out, she treated me exactly like my father did. I spent the next 13 years married to a woman that was as verbally and emotionally as derogatory as my father was. I wanted nothing to do with her or my father. However, I was oddly still looking to be validated by both. As the years went by, my father's disdain for me just grew. The disgust I had for his insulting comments made me feel the way my wife made me feel. I wanted nothing to do with either one of them, so I existed in either the basement of my home or in the garage just to avoid her comments. "I make more money than you. I have a college degree, so obviously I'm smarter than you." She just always made me feel inferior and less, just like my father. I remember in my college program, he told me what a stupid idea it was, and I'd be banging nails next to him for the rest of my life. I mean, who would say that to their kid? Why do we do this to ourselves? Why do we look for someone to insult us? You know, the people closest to us, we look to validate us, and yet for some of us it was the most hurtful people, and we're still looking for their validation. My next endeavor was, as you guessed it, would be drugs and alcohol, where nothing else worked. At this point, I was just absolutely confident that I was made to be nothing. I was completely certain that I was worthless, and the people around me were right on the money, that I just didn't have a value in being alive. I spent the next several years on a booze and cocaine bender looking for any validation from any woman that would be with me. It was evident that I was really walking in the valley of the shadow of death. All you can do in the valley of the shadow of death is walk. Walk alone and just hope that you die. While walking there, I realized that life couldn't get any lower. An upside does exist for other people. This is good for other people, and they can get fixed, but not me. I'm worthless. I'm a rat. I'm a cockroach, and this is where I belong, with the cast-outs and the worthless. I was felt to be buried under the earth's surface by 1,000 miles, and nobody could hear my screams. I was trapped in an emptiness so profound that the blackness of my life only matched the echoes of my loneliness. The tears that ran down my face were like acid burning my skin. I would scream, but nothing came out of my lungs, and my emptiness just continued for years. It wasn't until many years later that I found the Lord, and some healing did begin. It wasn't great, though. I did not have a functional knowledge of what a relationship was, so I really wasn't even realizing that Jesus wanted a relationship with me. It wasn't about just saying the sinner's prayer or attending church as I perceived it to be. He wanted a daily relationship where we were both communicating and we were both listening. I had no idea what that meant. I tried for a year or two, and then it just ran out of steam because I didn't know what it meant to have a relationship with someone, let alone to have a relationship with the creator of the universe. 3 or 4 more years had passed, and I still was attending church from time to time, but I was mostly finding my own self-centered validation and running my strength and conditioning center. I wasn't technically doing anything wrong, but I certainly wasn't living for God or living to have a relationship with Jesus. The only value that I found in myself was playing rugby and coaching weightlifting at my gym. Then one late summer day, I was riding my motorcycle to go to a beach party. I was rear-ended while I was on the highway. The car hit me from behind, and then the driver couldn't stop or control his vehicle. After the initial impact, he ran me over like a rabbit or a dog who was trying to cross the street. He ran over my hips and legs, and the initial impact pushed my sacrum through my bladder and through the front of my body. I was literally cut in half by the speeding car. My body was brought to Tufts Hospital in Cambridge, Mass. The surgical team came out of the ER after 10 hours to tell my family that there was nothing they could do and that we're going to let me pass away. There was no way that they could save my life. My spinal cord had been stretched and frayed, and it was decided that it would never work again if I lived, and it was doubtful I would even live. Between my hips, legs, ribs, and neck, I had over 19 fractures. It would be in my best interest to let me die while I was in the coma. My family convinced the surgical team to try to fix my body, so they did. They made an attempt. A week later, I had survived 26 surgeries and I was removed from the coma. They told my parents that I would never walk again and I probably wouldn't survive what was left of trying to heal up from everything that had happened so far. Not to mention the surgeries I would still need in the future to continue to fix the mess of a situation that I was in. I woke up not being able to feel or move my legs, and I couldn't move my neck due to the broken neck that I had. I had a tire track that was 12 inches wide across my waist and a scar similar to a C-section that stemmed from my left hip all the way across to my right hip. This is where they opened me up and tried to move my sacrum from the front of my body and put it back on my spine. I had 2 bolts that were about a foot long that were placed through my hips, and how they drilled the hole was right through the foramina of my spine, which pushed my spinal cord right up against the foramina, which would mean that my spinal cord, even if it was going to try to work, it never would, because you can't put a bolt up against it and expect it to be able to function. This was just such a terrible place to be, to wake up to this, they're trying to communicate to you that you're never going to move again and never walk if you live. So I'm trying to process this while I'm going through it, and I'm also processing that, my valley of shadow of death just seems to get worse. All my life I'd been walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Even while I was young in the Lord, I was walking in the valley of the shadow of death, but I couldn't see. I couldn't see freedom. The only value I had on this earth was playing and coaching rugby. Any hope of ever running down a field was now a distant memory. I would never score another try. I would never ride another motorcycle. I would never get to have a wife and walk down a beach with her or have any kind of a normal life. All of these things were now completely gone. They were not a possibility for me, and my valley just became darker. I yelled out to God and blamed him for my troubles, and I said, "What kind of God are you that you'd let me live through this? Couldn't I have just died and come home? I have to live through this?" And he said to me, "I'm giving you what you need." Man, I cried for hours. I cried for hours that day. It was the first time in my life I'd felt God's presence with me. It was his presence telling me that he was giving me what I needed. Over the next few months, I felt God's hand completely surround my life. I felt a protection and a love that I'd never known. I was beginning to understand. He was guiding me through the most physically painful and emotionally crippling experience of my life. I couldn't even imagine this was even possible after the life of dysfunction I've had, and now here I lay, being told I'm never going to walk if I live. All I could focus on was that I was never going to walk again. All I could see that if I did live through this, I would never stand up. Yet all I could feel was God's presence carrying me and guiding me during my deepest anguish. While I was going through that, he led me to the 23rd Psalm, which reads, "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table for me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me in all of my days, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever." It then became very real to me what was happening. The scripture can appear to be a carefully artistically written redemption and this beauty, which it really is. However, it's more important to see the passage and how alive it is. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. It doesn't mean that I'm not supposed to want anything. It means that I shall not need another shepherd. Jesus is the only one who not only can guide me, but he's the one who can provide me satisfaction with his guidance. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He knows when I need to rest. He can cause the train I'm driving to stop so that I can rest. Do you know that when David wrote this, he was employed as a shepherd in Bethlehem? At that time, there was only one pasture in Bethlehem for the sheep to eat. God states there that he can lead me to the pasture to rest and eat if, in fact, he is my shepherd. That's if I choose him to be my shepherd. I am his sheep. He can guide me to where I can rest. He leads me beside still waters is the next segment. Again, this is a fact that the Nile is a very swift river, and the sheep try to cross it at any point. They're too small and they're too weak to get to the other side. Yet God states he'll lead me to still water. There's only one location on that river that is shallow enough and where the water is slow enough for a sheep to cross. These facts still exist today, and God not only shows me where I can rest, but also how I can safely navigate the rest of my journey, which will in fact restore my soul. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for your rod and your staff will comfort me. Well, there I was, in the valley of the shadow of death. The shepherd's tools were a rod and a staff, and that's how the shepherd guided the sheep to move, especially at night. At night in the valley of the shadow of death, his rod and his staff were providing me comfort. He was comforting me and my light, and he was my light while I was beginning to let him guide me. I let him lead me through the valley of the shadow of death, but it was a conscious choice that I had to make. I had to choose to submit daily and surrender my journey before God so he could lead me. And then he began to lead me to what I needed. I'm giving you what you need. God was beginning to lead me through the rest of the valley of the shadow of death, which was the fact that I would never walk again. He began to let me evolve, and he shaped my thoughts. He began to teach me about his love and how to love others. He began to lead me with his rod and his staff and to forgive the man who hit me. As the months passed and my relationship grew, I was an entirely changed man. The relationship I was allowed to have with him was so unmatched that I found happiness and love for each day instead of angst and emptiness. I did start to eventually move my legs, and I made a pretty close to full recovery about 5 years later. I'm giving you what you need. It had nothing to do with my legs. The return function of my legs was a gift that God gave to me while he showed me how to have a relationship with him. What I needed was a relationship with him on my journey through the valley of the shadow of death, and he set me free with his love, and honestly, I can't compare that to anything I thought possible on this earth. To learn more about God's love, check out my book named Freedom. It's available at jeffdardine.com, and it's also available on Amazon.